Today is All Saints' Day. It's one of the 4 days of the year when it's said that the notorious witch, La Corriveau, sweeps through the skies and descends on the realm of the living. Well, who is La Corriveau? Who was the woman behind the legend? In this video, I'm going to do a reading for part 2 of Stories from Strange Events and More, Canadian Giants, Witches and Wizards, and Other Tales by Johanna Bertin. In the first video, we talked about the sad case of Daniel Voyle. In this video, we are going to talk about Marie-Josephe Corriveau and who she was and how she came to be tried in the 1700s here in Canada and ultimately executed for witchcraft. If you've never heard this story before, stay tuned. Join me as I read, and happy All Saints' Day. Woo! On May 14th, 1733, an exquisite baby girl was born in the village of Saint-Vallier, New France. Before her 30th birthday, she would die on the gallows, convicted of murder and suspected of witchcraft and sorcery. Her name was Marie-Josephe, daughter of Joseph and Marie Corriveau. Her mother was a descendant of the filles de roi, orphans brought from France as brides for the habitants. Her parents were not rich, but they owned fertile farmland on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River opposite Quebec, the capital of New France. Situated as it was, the farm commanded a view of the Ile d'Orléans, an island known to be inhabited by sorcerers, and a place where a coven of witches was said to hold its festivals. Marie-Joseph's childhood was uneventful. She was the adored and very beautiful only child of a young mother and a much older father. At the age of 16, she married the handsome and wealthy farmer Charles Bouchard. People from miles around attended at the parish church to wish the couple well. The marriage seemed to prosper, and though they had no children, the couple appeared to their neighbors to be happy. But on the morning of April 17th, 1760, people were amazed to see Marie-Josephe running from her house to the village center. She was distraught, weeping, beside herself. She said between sobs that she had awoken that morning to find her husband dead beside her. The people of Saint-Vallier couldn't do enough for Marie-Josephe. They imagined her terror on awakening beside the cooling corpse of Charles. They imagined her leaning over to kiss his brow and her shock at finding it cold. They decided that it would be best for Marie-Josephe if they had a quick burial. The widow was so distraught, they said, that it would do nothing but harm to delay the process. But within a space of 2 days, they had held the funeral and buried Charles in the parish cemetery beside the church. They then comforted Marie-Josephe as best they could, though little seemed to help. When, less than 3 months later, Marie-Josephe married again, the habitants worried that she had been hasty, had perhaps acted out of sorrow and loneliness. Her new husband, Louis Daudier, was a drinker known to frequent the taverns and socialize with the British troops who had been garrisoned in the area since the British had successfully fought off the forces of the Chevalier de Lévis. The gossips of the parish spread rumors about Marie-Josephe. They questioned whether it was seemly for a widow to marry again so soon. Of course, at 27 she was no longer young, they said, and could not afford to be choosy. But 3 months was far less than a respectable mourning period. Again, there were no children, but the couple seemed content. Marie-Josephe had her father living next door, and he provided her company when her husband was at the tavern. Everything changed on Monday, January 27th, 1763. That day dawned cold, so cold that people delayed going to their barns to feed their animals. When the Daudier stableman had finally made his way to the stable, he found the corpse of Louis Daudier in his horse's stall. It appeared that Daudier had been kicked in the head and had probably died instantly from the terrible wound. The stableman ran to the house to tell Marie-Josephe. She immediately sent him on to the barracks to report the death and fetch the priest. The captain of the militia, the priest Father Thomas Blondeau, and 10 others descended on the barn where Marie-Josephe and her father stood vigil over Daudier's body. After a cursory examination, the captain of the militia reported that Louis Daudier had died as a result of a kick to the head. Major Abercrombie granted permission for an immediate burial. A week later, suspicions surfaced. The authorities questioned Joseph Corriveau's servant girl. Had she seen or heard anything unusual, they asked? The frightened girl, Isabelle Sylvain, responded that she had woken and heard yelling from the stable the night of Louis Daudier's death, and a sound as if a horse was being beaten. In light of this new evidence, Governor James Murray granted permission for an exhumation of the body. Daudier was dug up and taken to the barracks for an autopsy. This time, the examination was thorough, and the army surgeon declared that the gash on the farmer's head was 4 inches deep, far too deep to be made by a horse, even one with shoes on, such as Daudier's horse. To add credence to his suspicion, the injury was clear of any trace of manure or straw. Both would have been embedded in the cut if a horse had dealt the killing blow. The army surgeon had seen many a battlefront injury. He suspected that an axe, not a horse, had caused the fatal blow, and he reported those findings to Major Abercrombie, who ordered the militia to return to the Corriveau and Daudier homes. They were to question everyone again, especially the stableman and the servant girl. The militia was familiar with Daudier from his visits to the tavern, frequented by the English. They also knew that Joseph adored his only child. Had Joseph and Daudier fallen into an argument over Daudier's drinking and his treatment of Marie-Josephe? The militia first questioned Isabelle, Joseph's servant girl. Her bedroom was close to the stairs and her window overlooked the shared stable yard. She said that she had heard Marie-Josephe go down to the stable and then come back into the house and speak with her father. Isabelle said that Marie-Josephe and her father had then returned to the stable together. It now seemed that both the Corriveaux, father and daughter, were implicated in Daudier's murder. As Quebec was then under British rule, the English military governor, James Murray, served as the civil authority for the township. Governor Murray charged Joseph Corriveau with the murder of his son-in-law, Louis Daudier, and had him placed in the military jail. Marie-Josephe was charged as an accomplice in the murder. The military barracks was an unsuitable place for a female prisoner, so Governor Murray had an escort of soldiers take Marie-Josephe across the ice-filled St. Lawrence River to the Ursuline convent in Quebec, where she would await trial. For 2 months, Marie-Josephe lived at the Ursuline convent as a prisoner and a house guest. On Tuesday, March 29th, a court-martial, the only tribunal existing in the country at the time, was held in the reception room of the convent. Joseph Corriveau was brought from the military barracks, and his daughter was escorted from her room. The court-martial began. First, the stableman testified to finding Daudier dead in the barn. Then the army surgeon took the stand and spoke to his findings regarding the likely cause of death. Next came the servant girl, Isabelle, with her damning evidence. It appeared that Marie-Josephe and her father would both be found guilty and sentenced to death. But Joseph Corriveau spoke out. In a loud voice, he claimed that he, and he alone, had dealt the blow that had killed Louis Daudier. And so it was that on April 10th, 1763, less than 3 months after the murder, the tribunal sentenced him to hang for the murder of his son-in-law. Marie-Josephe would not escape unpunished for what many felt was her complicity in her husband's murder. They reasoned that if she had not been involved, she would have reported her husband missing when he failed to return home that night. Her proposed punishment was harsh. The military court sentenced her to receive 60 lashings on bare skin from a cat of 9 tails. not once, but at 3 separate locations. The whippings were to be held in public at the place of the hanging of her father, at the marketplace in Quebec, and in the parish of Saint-Vallier. It was suggested that she also be branded with a hot iron, branded with the letter M for her part in the murder of her husband. The tribunal had not believed her father's protestations of Marie-Joseph's innocence. Marie-Josephe was escorted back to her room at the convent to await her flogging. Her father was hustled back to his cell in the garrison. There, a soldier summoned the Jesuit Reverend Father Glapion to receive the prisoner's confession. It wasn't long before Joseph's courtroom confession began to disassemble. Joseph was willing to die for his daughter, but he wasn't willing to lie to his confessor. He told the priest the truth, that he had had no part in his son-in-law's death, and that his daughter had been the one to swing the axe. The priest informed the militia, and a new trial was ordered. 5 days later, on April 15, 1763, Marie-Josephe again stood in the convent reception room, charged with the murder of her husband. No more was there any mention of her simply being an accomplice. This time, she stood alone, and no one came to her aid. 3 days later, a month shy of her 30th birthday, Marie-Josephe was hanged on the plains of Abraham. A large crowd had been expected to gather for the execution of a woman found guilty of murdering her husband, but rumors began to spread, fear among the people. It was said that Marie-Josephe had often looked across the water from her home on the south shore to the Ile d'Orléans, where it was known that sorcerers lived. It was said that Marie-Joseph's mother had often taken her to the island as a child, had taken her across the river on nights of the full moon to dance with the coven of witches that practiced their arts there. It was said that not only was she a witch, but that she was the daughter of a witch, and that her grandmother had been the daughter of an alchemist of old France. Marie-Josephe had enemies, and they fanned the rumors. People from the parish who had once supported her, even comforted her, now took fault with the haste of her actions in remarrying. Those same people who had recommended the hasty burial of her first husband, Charles, now conveniently forgot that it was they who had suggested it, and fed the lie that Marie-Josephe had insisted on the quick burial. It was a short step from there to imply that Marie-Josephe had murdered her first husband too. Once admired and adored, Marie-Josephe was now depicted as a heartless and cruel murderer. A witch who was a member of the coven that met on the Ile d'Orléans. No one but the most curious or the most foolish attended the hanging, for the practitioners knew that a dying witch had power, the power to curse those who had witnessed her death. Marie-Joseph's humiliation was to be complete. After her execution, she was cut down, and a cage of iron was forged around her body. The soldiers then lifted the cage onto a farm wagon and transported it and its burden across the river to Point Levis. At the intersection of the 4 roads, the soldiers suspended the cage from a tree, leaving the dead woman inside as a warning to those who had murder or witchcraft in their hearts. Marie-Joseph's corpse slowly rotted, exposed as it was to the spring rains and the harsh sun. Birds poked their beaks through the iron bars, tearing strips of flesh off the lifeless body. Rats climbed up the tree, onto the ropes, and into the cage. The curious stayed away, fearing reprisals from Marie-Josephe. It was said that the intersection was haunted. Accidents were frequent. It was as if people were unable to concentrate when they reached that spot in the road. Walkers said they felt the claws of skeletal hands grasping their neck if they lingered too long. that they heard a woman's voice demanding to be carried across the waters to the Ile d'Orléans so that she could dance with the devil. On May 25th, 1763, Marie-Joseph's cage was cut down. No one claimed responsibility. Perhaps it was soldiers, armed as they were, who braved the phantom. Perhaps it was the villagers, together with a priest, who wanted to put Marie-Joseph's soul to rest. The cage was transported to the cemetery, where a pit was dug, and Marie-Joseph's remains were laid to rest, still held within the cage. Poor woman. That might have been the end of the story. But in 1830, a cemetery worker preparing a burial site had dug up the unmarked grave and discovered the cage of La Corriveau, as she was now called. The cage was sold to the Barnum and Bailey Circus in New York, where it was displayed to the horror and delight of patrons. Some say that the cage was sold again, others that it was destroyed in the fires at Barnum's. La Corriveau's spirit is said to sweep through the skies on at least 4 days of the year. The Witches' Sabbath, April 30th, Walpurgisnacht, May 1st, Halloween, October 31st, and All Souls' Day, November 2nd. On these days, it is said that you could feel the cold claws of La Corriveau's skeletal fingers on your neck. I couldn't help myself. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe, and we'll see you in another video. Happy All Saints' Day, and ciao for now.